Welcome, Exiles. What a time to be alive. Ultimatum League is looking pretty good. I went through and watched the Bay class, the Q&A with Chris, and the content trailers and all the reveals and whatnot, and I took a bunch of notes on the most impactful, or what I thought were the most important changes, and I'm going to kind of go through them with you guys, basically point by point what I think these things will do to the economy, what they will do to you, the player, and my thoughts on just the generic changes as well. So, to begin with, one of the biggest changes they did was they basically nerfed multi-boxing the Uncharted Realms fights. Previously, what you could do is you could have one player gets the Cortex fight, the Chayula fight, the Uber Ziri. They get all those fights lined up. Then they'd run some virtual machines, log into 5 other accounts, and they would witness all these fights with those extra 5 accounts, and therefore they'd be able to run the feared 6 times and get 6 times the rewards for 1 times of the actual investments. This would screw over the regular player, because if you're a regular player and you finally get to the point where your character can take on the feared, you'd pay the money to get those fights, to then go to do the feared, and by that time you'd get the rewards from the feared and you'd be like, I lost money. I did the hardest content and I lost money doing it. I achieved something great and it wasn't even worth it. That was the problem with multi-boxing, because you'd have to compete with the guy who'd get 6 times the rewards. It wasn't a fair playing field if you're competing with somebody who's basically cheating. So, multi-boxing, unfortunately, or not unfortunately, really fortunately, is it's dead. You can no longer multi-witness fights. Stuff like that is, it's getting the old axe. This is unfortunate for those of you who would party play, because you can't party play and enjoy this anymore. So that's unfortunate there, but I think ultimately, overall, this is mostly just a benefit. After Uncharted Realms getting the axe, beast farmers are getting the axe next. So people that would farm a bunch of split beast and imprint beasts using multi-boxing as well, they're also getting wrecked because imprints and split beasts have gotten a huge nerf. You can no longer split the same base over and over again. Once you split a base, it'll get the split tag, which means it cannot be split again. So this means 6-link bases will be much more expensive. You're not going to be able to buy a 6-link white astral plate for, 30C, 50C, whatever it got down to during this league. These things will be multi-X items because they can only be split once. So it's ultimately, bases will be more expensive, but split beasts themselves will be less expensive because the demand will go way down for them. Also, there is no endless duping of the perfect items. Previously, what you could do is you could take a perfect magic item, like a Merciless T1 attack speed jewel foil, that's a magic base. You could split it and then imprint back to the original base. So that way, if you got the perfect item to occur on the drop that occurs on the split, you could then imprint it and you'd have 2 perfect bases. That's no longer doable, as well as you cannot imprint split bases. So the beast farming bestiary boost got hit from all sides, and I think that's ultimately a good thing for most players. Ultimatum League overall kind of seemed like Ritual 2.0, except with the final boss. In the trailer, they teased a cool looking boss. Chris very heavily hinted at it being a cool boss, so I'm kind of excited to get to this boss and see what the mechanics hold, how hard it is, how challenging it is, and of course, getting some new boss drops are always, get some new cool uniques. I'm always excited for that. So if Ultimatum's rewards are significantly better than Ritual in terms of you taking greater and greater risk, I think that's a cool mechanic, and I'm excited for it. As for the changes to the loot system in general, we have many league-specific uniques are now droppable in the generic drop table. Previously, you could only drop a Headhunter if you rolled a map with the Zana Nemesis mod onto the map. Now, you can drop a Headhunter anywhere. Essentially, what this means is on Reddit, we get to know that other people are lucky and we're not lucky, because we get to watch them drop Headhunters while we continue to drop things like Worm's Molt. But hey, it's cool seeing other people get lucky. Next up, we have some new bases. The Energy Shield Recharge Amulet, Chaos Damage Ring. They hinted at there being, I think, at least 5 new bases, so maybe some of those new bases are really cool, really good for certain archetypes. That remains to be seen. We will see. Act bosses have apparently gotten better loot. This, I think, will be cool for leveling. Getting maybe some decent loot while leveling characters here and there could be really nice. I'm not sure it's going to be worth doing. I really have some hesitancy about it being worth doing. Previously, there's been a lot of scenarios where GGG has stated, oh, we made the loot good now. Mastermind, temple mods. If you run a bunch of hard temples, you get some cool loot. this really has never been the case generally when they've said, oh, this is good loot now. So this, I'm imagining, is going to be a similar case of the act loot gets better, but it's not really worth farming, you know. So we'll see if this actually is worth farming or not. I don't think it will be. New secret vendor recipes. This is cool for the people who like to try to find out what the new secret vendor recipe is, as well as bringing some new cool recipe to the table that maybe allows us to get access to some cool items. Not sure what these will be. Essentially, they've hinted at them being economically impactful, so if you are the guy that figures out the recipe first, you will probably be sitting on an island with your private yacht and your really cool mansion, and you'll be living it up. Or you could be a man of the people and tell everybody else on Reddit and get a bunch of upvotes. It's really yours to choose if you end up seeking out these vendor recipes and figuring it out. Power to you, man. After that, we got Val Reliquary Keys. Previously in Legacy League, you could drop this item called a Reliquary Key, which would allow you to acquire a foil version of a Legacy item. This could give you some of the most broken items previously in the game, like Calm's Heart used to give you 1,000 life instead of 500. It was twice as powerful. Stuff like that used to exist, but this Reliquary Key specifically is just a foil version of a Val-themed item. Nothing overpowered. I think it's just going to be kind of a collector's thing and kind of just fun to go in there, you know, open a chest and get a cool item potentially, because everything is equal weighting. So you have just as much likely to get probably a Ziri's Val gauntlets as you do getting something like, I don't know, what other Val item that sucks would be. You have equal weighting between the good item and the bad item, so that could be interesting there. After that, we have Itziri, Uber Itziri have had rewards buff. There are now 4 new uniques. So 2 new uniques for Itziri herself and 2 uniques for Uber Itziri. Hopefully these uniques are really powerful and that gives you a reason to farm a boss. I could be excited for this. I'm excited to see if there's some good build enabling uniques in here. They already revealed the Itziri's rule staff, which gives you Itziri's demand. Build enabling skill could be really cool to build around. I'm excited about what other uniques there could be there as well. Now looking at the lab rework. This one is probably one of the best changes coming in this league. It's one that the people have demanded for years, and GGG finally had the developer time to create it. And what we're getting is we get a enchant table, and whenever we open it up, it tells you you can have these 3 helmet enchants. It tells you what they're going to be, or you can have this glove enchant or this boot enchant. This makes it so going into enchanting your item, you know, okay, there's a really good enchant for a melee skill, or there's a really good enchant for a caster skill. This eliminates the scenario where you take a caster helmet and get the perfect melee enchant and you just have to die on the inside a little bit. So I'm really excited about this, no longer getting bad or good enchants on the wrong base. Stuff like that going into Uber Lab, it makes Uber Lab a lot more enticing. They've also said, screw the one guy arm team, the unique lab jewels. If you didn't know, there was a guy who won basically every single day of PoE existence, has consistently been the fastest lab runner. That's a little bit suspicious if you ask me. He was probably cheating, probably using map hacks. Who knows exactly what he was doing, but more or less they said, screw that one guy who's been making a fortune off the jewels. We're going to make the jewels a rare drop. So that way now if you're in the lab, you can randomly see the cool rare lab jewels, and it's actually relevant to the player base because it's no longer monopolized by one guy who's probably cheating. They also added lab specific uniques. So I think they added 2 of those. There was a shield they showcased, which looked decently cool, and who knows, maybe what the other one is might be cool as well. Then moving on, we're getting into basically where they're buffing all the various league mechanics that have previously been powerful elsewhere. Sorry, that's my oven going off. I need to throw the pizza in there. But anyways, you look at Essence, you look at Breach, you look at Abyss. All these various league mechanics have been watered down in terms of it's better to go to a league mechanic that isn't Abyss to get Abyss jewels. And they're trying to say, okay, we would rather have the emphasis being on, if you want to get this specific league-specific items, we want to make it the best case scenario where you're farming that specific league content. So they're buffing all of this league content, and then they're making it more likely that you can get the best league content of that specific league content doing that league content, not something else. So for essences, you can now get basically the essences are buffed, and now if you're getting the special essences, they're only acquirable through Remnant of Corruption, where previously you could get Essence of Horror from doing something like Heist, from doing something like Harvest. They're trying to basically balance that out. Also, Breach Blessings. they can now upgrade breach stones. This is meaning that pure breach stones are way easier to come by, and XP is going to be way easier to come by. So if you want to speed level some characters, that's great for you. Abyss jewels are getting just generic buffs all the way around, as well as getting some Abyss scarabs and Abyss unique jewels through doing Abyss content. Speaking specifically of Abyss jewel buffs, one of the things I saw a screenshot of that I thought was pretty cool is this one specifically, the mod that gives you a chance to avoid bleeding. I don't think this was something you could get previously all the way up to 20%. It used to be like 10%, I think. I think this plus Harvest Implicits with like Avoid Bleed, stuff like this becomes a lot more doable to get ailment immunity of specific types, like bleeding, which is very deadly. So I think this could make a lot more viability for Abyssal Jewels if you can get some really good items with it. So I'm kind of excited for the changes there. After that, we have some new beast crafts, such as Exalt a random mod onto a map or an item. This is basically, I think, GGG's way of giving us more random exalts, so that way you still feel like you have some crafting ability. For the most part, random exalting items usually isn't too powerful. There are select scenarios where you can control it. So this will just be a nice boost for just randomly being able to exalt some items, take some YOLO exalts, maybe get something cool. Ultimately, though, I don't think these are a huge change here. Incursion. This change is I really like. You can now itemize the temples you get. So you get a temple with a corruption chamber. You can now turn that into an item and sell that to other people. You no longer have to go to TFT or some other trading Discord or chat in Global and say, hey, I got a corruption chamber selling for 2x. You can now actually probably sell it via the trade site. You can make some currency when you farm these specific corruption chambers and stuff like that. So that's exciting, as well as if you want to hold on to the temple for later, you can now store it. You don't have to run it right away to continue to run Alva content. So that's a really big buff. They've also apparently buffed Incursion uniques, so that's cool, as well as apparently buffing the boss drops from the temple and just buffing stuff, just Incursion all the way around. So Incursion got some huge, nice changes, really good there. Delve changes are basically, we're going to buff everything and then nerf the top end. So if you're a deep delver going down to 6,000 depth and you want a fractured fossil every other node, that's probably no longer going to be the case. I'd imagine they are nerfing the fractured fossil drop rate in the deep delve heavily, as well as maybe buffing it in the much lower depths for just your average Joe going through to 200 depth or whatever. So ultimately, for most players, this is a buff. For the deep delve boys, they're getting screwed a little bit. I'm imagining deep delve will probably still be very profitable, but not quite so busted as it is now currently. As for Betrayal, please, we're begging you at this point, run Katarina. I know you don't like me screwing over your entire syndicate board, but please, just run Katarina. That is what they're saying to us because they have buffed Katarina massively again. Now there are tier 4 versions of the rewards. Instead of tier 3, you can now get tier 4 versions of the various Betrayal Masters by running Katarina. So they really want you to run Katarina, as well as giving Katarina a cool new staff, which I think has potential to be really good. It's going to be an RNG thing depending on the veiled mods you unveil with it. So interesting stuff is going on there for sure. Along with, veiled mods are now more powerful when unveiled. This means there's a difference between crafting onto an item with a veiled mod, like, so you can craft on 10% double damage. If you unveil it on an item, maybe it unveils to be 14% double damage. So that's the difference there between those two things. You have the ability to then put on veiled mods onto the item with Ashling, potentially allowing you to add your last crafted affix as a more powerful crafted affix. So these could be cool to build around. Excited there, as well as they added veiled chaos orbs to the drop table. These basically allow you to either farm a specific veiled mod. Say you're looking for the trigger socketed spell, you spam that on a scepter until you get trigger socketed spell, or you're just trying to craft an item, you spam chaos orbs until you hit maybe a good veiled mod with some decent mods. These could be cool. I don't know what to think about them. I think they're mostly going to be used for finding specific veil crafts. Now looking at Blight. Blight has been changed so that way you can roll the maps and get the item quantity to affect the chests. So previously you'd complete a rare Blight map and the quantity on the map would not affect all the chests all the way around. So now it's worth actually rolling the maps and increasing the difficulty. Also, they have allowed a new tainted oil to exist. This means if you corrupt the Blighted map and you complete it, there is a chance throughout the corrupted map that you drop a tainted oil. This allows you to anoint corrupted amulets. This is a huge buff for talismans like the Eyes of the Great Wolf, like the crit, the unarmed crit amulet, stuff like that is getting a huge buff because previously those amulets were just strictly worse than everything else because they didn't have anointments. That's cool to see that those are getting a buff, as well as just if you corrupted an item, now you have a chance to make something good out of it if you get a GG corruption that is worth anointing, so to speak. So definitely like those changes as well, and Blight of Scarabs have been added as well. For Metamorph, nothing too crazy. They just added crit and speed catalysts, so nothing much to talk about there. As for Harvest, yeah, Harvest got nerfed. We all talked about that to ad nauseum. Probably don't need to talk about it more here. As for Ritual, it's been added to the core game as an 8% chance, and they've also standardized this now. Now, previously, all League mechanics they were added as a 10% chance, as a 7% chance, as a 9% chance. I don't know, random things between 5 and 10%. League mechanics have been now standardized that League mechanics are always an 8% chance. So if you have 8% chance to get Harvest, 8% chance to get Ritual, 8% to get Abyss, and you add up all the different League mechanics, it's pretty much maybe over 100%. I don't know how many League mechanics we have at this point, but when you run a map, you have an 8% chance to get all these different League mechanics, and you can get some pretty crazy maps with a bunch of different League mechanics. So they're just standardizing that, so we now all know the number is 8%. Atlas passives have been rebalanced. This, we don't know how they've been rebalanced. We have to wait for patch notes, but you can well assume that the Harbinger passive is, it got shot more than likely, and the passives that were bad probably got buffed. It'll be exciting to see how they've rebalanced, if they move passives around. I'm interested to see their shakeup on the Atlas passive trees themselves. As for talismans, you might as well just believe they don't exist, hide them from your filter, because they no longer roll as good items. They roll as regular rares. They don't have the special rolling system. And I think this is a poor decision, because talismans, even with them rolling as good, I still struggled to decide whether or not it was worth my time to even look at them, even with the good rolling system. Now, without the good rolling system, 100% of the time, I'm never taking the time to look at talismans, because they're never going to be good enough to be worth the amount of talismans I'm going to have to look at to find one that's actually worth using. So I don't think this was a good decision. I think talismans are still below the power level of influence gear. I think finding a GG talisman, I think, could be cool. And now it's just not going to happen. So might as well hide them for your filter, because they're dead. They're dead for sure. And then next up we have the new blood skills. These are pretty exciting. I myself am thinking about starting as a blood mage. We will see. Waiting for patch notes to see how good the damage numbers look. If they look good enough, I'm probably going to end up doing it. But let's start it off with Petrified Blood. This is basically a aura that you reserve some mana to make it so you do not recover above half life. The upside is, if you take damage, 40% of that hit is taken over 4 seconds. What this means is if you get hit with 2,000 damage, 1,200 of that damage will go to your life pool instantly. But say you have a 1,500 HP build, or 1,500 at half life, you then would survive. You wouldn't get 2k one hit. You'd have 300 HP, and then you'd have to sustain that 800 damage as 800 damage over 4 seconds. So if you have a bunch of sustain, this could be a potential new playstyle they're trying to create, and if the buffs with the playstyle are good enough, I think they could be convincing. So I'm going to be tempted to maybe try the skill out. Right now, looking at it, I think I can't quite picture it being viable enough. I think you're still going to get one shot way too much for this to be worth it, but I don't know. I don't want to sell out on it just yet, or give up on it just yet. I'm still hesitantly gonna probably end up trying to build around it. Next up, you have Corrupting Fever. This allows you to create a temporary buff that makes you inflict Corrupting Blood on enemies. The base damage of that Corrupting Blood is based on the Corrupting Fever level. So this can stack up to 10 times, at least that's what Rory said in the Bay class episode. And this also means that Corrupting Blood only stacks on the player 10 times. So we don't die quite as fast to Corrupting Blood as we used to, as well as it's a new skill that we can now kill enemies with and get revenge for all the times we've died to Corrupting Blood. So I think this is pretty cool. It'll be fun to see how strong this is, and if you can work it into like Fizz Bleed builds and whatnot. I think it has some nice potential. After that, we have Exsanguinate and Reap. These are both skills that are Fizz, and they're hit/dot based. So they're trying to do this hybrid thing, which doesn't necessarily work in PoE, because usually if you're scaling a hit skill, you are anti-scaling a dot build. You're not scaling a dot build. If you're scaling a dot build, you're not scaling a hit build because of the support gems that exist. And because of just the scaling on the tree. So this will be, I don't know, I think it's going to be up in the air how viable this is going to be. I want to see what passive tree changes they've made, as well as what other support gems and what things they've added to account for this, to try to build both into the hit or both into the dot, or maybe you're just going to have to build into the dot-based version of the skill, or you're going to have to build into the hit-based version of the skill, and not one or the other. So this will be interesting. I kind of want to play around these skills just because they look so cool. I mean, just the visuals of Reap and the visuals of Exsanguinate, they're really cool looking. So I kind of just want to build around them just because of that. But I'm not sure how viable they're going to be. So we're going to have to wait for the patch notes to see what all they're adding passive tree-wise and what's going to be good enough to support this playstyle. So that's pretty much the physical dot caster. I think this is going to be similar to a cold, fire, or chaos dot caster where we're building into multiple of these skills. So like you have a chaos dot caster where they use essence drain and they use blight. So you have 2 chaos dots going at once. Or you're using cold snap plus vortex. You know, you have multiple of these dots and you can stack them both on the enemy and have like 2 single target setups. I think that's kind of how this is going to play out if you're building around the dot version of these skills. So I'm kind of excited to see what we get into there with those skills. Really pumped for them. Next up, we have the Arrogance support gem and the Life Tap support gem. These are taking the Blood Magic support gem and splitting them into 2 different supports. You basically have Arrogance support, which is for the aura builds. So it's Blood Magic for auras. And then you have Life Tap support, which is Blood Magic for actual like attack or spell-based builds. Life Tap support, I think, is the new MVP support. I think it's going to be used in a lot of builds. It solves the mana problem completely. I got 99 problems, but Mana Sustain ain't one of them with Life Tap support. It not only solves Mana Sustain, but it also is a pretty decent damage support. It starts out at 20% at level 1, which if I'm judging off of other support gems like a Hypothermia, for example, Hypothermia starts at 20% and it goes all the way to 39%. So if this Life Tap goes up to 39% more damage, it's pretty much always going to be something you use in most of your builds that are life-based, that don't have a lot of mana scaling because it solves mana, which is generally a problem. Next up, we have Cruelty, which is a special support for hit/dot based builds. So it's trying to be a hybrid support to try to enable the Exsanguinate and Reap. I don't know if it's going to be enough. I don't know if this support's going to be enough damage for those skills to be worth it. That remains to be seen, but I'm hopeful. After that, we have Bloodthirst support, which is basically a low life attack support. It gives you a bunch of flat fizz based on 2% of your life. So if you have 5k life, that's 100 flat fizz. This could be usable for I think of Pillar of the Cage God. I think of Face Breakers. I think of Paradoxica. Builds that build around those items, they could see some use if you're building around the new low life mechanics. I think there's potential there for sure. Now, that is pretty much everything. We have a couple more right at the end here. These are just things I picked up during the Bay class. We have the nerf to Val Righteous Fire's buff to spell damage. I think that was confirmed by Rory. We'll see what it is in the patch notes, but rip to the content creators that only showcase DPSing bosses with Val Righteous Fire DPS, because it's going to be less now. Next up, we have the Ultimatum monsters are all supposedly able to be created into Spectres, which means there's a whole new pool for possible really strong Spectres. As we've seen in previous leagues, Harvest, Heist, they release monsters that are very strong, and if you turn them into Spectres, they can often be quite broken. So maybe some really cool Spectre builds will come out of this, so that's really exciting for the Spectre boys. As for the Balance Manifesto, it has been referenced that Explodey Chest is being addressed. How is it being addressed? I think we can only assume it's going to get nerfed. I don't think they're going to buff Explodey Chest. And this was mentioned in the Bay class episode, so I'm excited to see what they do with Explodey Chest. It clearly is broken compared to every other mod in existence. Explode is the mod, so I can only imagine it's getting a nerf. And last but not least, the veiled system change that was kind of a niche thing that they mentioned, but I still think is important. If you previously had a veiled mod, say you had a scepter and you unveil it, and you found trigger socketed spell, you could then remove that crafted mod, use Ashling to add on a crafted mod, and it was guaranteed to give you that same set of veiled mods because of the item ID. what was mentioned by Rory is they've changed this. So now, if you have an item, you can get different veiled mods. This is important for 2 reasons. Reason 1 is you can no longer use the same item over and over to finish up your unveil for the trigger socketed spell. But reason number 2 is now, if you're crafting an item and you use Ashling to add on a veiled mod, it can be different mods. So say you don't get the mod you want the first time, you can remove the craft and you can try again. So that means that if you create a really cool item, these new veiled mods can be stronger than the craftable versions, and then you can veil on these like more powerful veiled crafts. So that's pretty cool. And that, I think, takes me to the end of my notes and the stuff I wrote down about cool changes they're adding to Ultimatum League and what to expect. I'm really excited. I think this is going to be a really good league. I think it's simple, it's fun, it's got risk, it's got reward. I can get behind this league concept, and I'm excited to build around. Personally, I'm really thinking about starting a Blood Mage. I really am. I think it's going to be a really cool, these really cool looking spells. I kind of want to build around them. You know, league starting with new skills is always a dangerous choice. You think of things like, oh, I can't even remember that it's something burst, or I don't know. It's the skill where you put runes on the ground and they burst. It's a lightning skill. That thing sucked on release. It still sucks now. But then you have skills like Winter Orb, which were completely busted on release. So it's going to be kind of up in the air. Are these skills going to be really good on release, or are they going to be bad? It's a risk you got to take, but honestly, with how cool they're looking, I'm really tempted. This might not be a Righteous Fire League start. It might be a Blood Mage League start for me. We will see. Anyways, guys, I appreciate you watching the video, and I will see you all in Ultimatum League. Peace out, guys.